Carried.
Okay,
Okay.
David, it's up to you now.
Thank you very much, Lynette. Might need you to guide me through some of the procedural issues because I'm looking at things online here, so I haven't printed a copy of the agenda either.
Okay.
I'm trying to balance between the two screens. So anyway, welcome everybody. We have an apology therefore to record, which is Ruku, and I think we should note Jackie, an apology from Jackie as well, at least until she joins the call.
So, David, with Ruku, it would be it'll be an apology for lateness.
Yeah.
I think at this stage.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Oh, right. That's excellent.
So you just need to get a mover and seconder for that, David.
All right. Moved by Gavin, seconded by Garth. Good morning, Garth.
And the resolution.
And put the resolution. All right. Now, can I welcome everyone else to the call? Both Waikato District Council and equally Watercare Services. Good to see you there, Sharon. Right, confirmation of status of agenda. What do I need to do there? Is that just to note that, Lynette?
So we've got the two external presenters coming in this morning at 9:30. And we just need to take them as they arrive. So the business could be slightly out of order, and that's all you need to worry about.
Okay.
So you just move and second that it can be out of order, and we'll just go from there.
Right. So looks like
Yep.
looks like Gavin has moved for random order. Garth is seconding, and I'll put that, and we're all unanimous, equally so.
Yep.
Okay, disclosures of interest. The register of interest documents there. Any changes required? None from Garth. Gavin, there's one from me. I have reached the end of my term as Chair of Wellington Water, so I have retired from that role. So if that can be removed, and that everything else is as recorded.
Yep.
Right. Confirmation of the minutes. So we have a set of minutes there from our last meeting, Thursday, 23rd July. Are there any changes required to those minutes?
Not for me.
If not, I'm happy to put from the chair that we adopt the minutes. Can I have a seconder? Gavin, all in favour? Raise your hands. Pass. Now we have a number of actions arising from those minutes, so I think we'll move therefore onto the actions register. I think they are all handled there on my look through. So who wants to take us through that? Is that you, Ian?
Yep, I can start. We've had a lot on this last month, so some of these haven't progressed quite as far as we'd perhaps like with regards to the August deadline. Carol, do you want to just give a quick update on that audit process?
Sure. Yep. So that first action, the audit process, I've been in touch with one of the potential suppliers of that audit and starting to put together a scope, and then we'll go out to market to get a competitive price to see who does it. We have decided just to put it on hold slightly to wait for the annual report audit to be complete, so there's no repetition of work, and also to wait until we've got a full year of the contract under Watercare operating. So I just suggest that one we move that date out to October, please.
And just flying through those, September, treatment's complete. The training, I think that's the subject of the next item, whenever that comes in at 9:30. Local government, waiting for the election, so nothing there. The iwi partnership, there's been some discussion around that, so Sam is moving with that, I believe, Gavin, the forum, so I think that's in hand. And the health and safety reporting has been increased in the report. It's not quite where we want to get it to, but it's another little iteration. So that's certainly done, and the KPIs have been resolved for Raglan, and not done the letter for the stormwater abatement, just haven't had a chance, to be honest, but there's actions underway galore. So yeah, lots on. And there we go. So that's the overview of the actions register. Any questions at all?
Questions again?
Very good.
Right. Garth, any questions that you've got?
Sorry, just on that last one on the Raglan stormwater abatement notice, is there any penalty for not kind of progressing that, or is that just out of the course?
There's no penalty as such yet, and it's going through another review at the moment, I think, at the end of this compliance year. So yeah, there's nothing as it stands at the moment. And Sharon's, as per the ops report, Sharon's been had a recent meeting with regional council just to update them on where we're at. So I think it's in hand. There's no, it's not a hot spot that I'm concerned at the moment. All in hand with the stormwater management plan consultant doing that work and a bit of catch up still.
When would you expect?
Sorry?
When would you expect it to be sent to the regional council?
I think it's going to end up being surpass most recent compliance audit. But certainly within the next couple of months, I think we'd get that done. I'll do an update. Let's just put September on, that would be fine.
Okay, let's change that.
Yeah.
Right, Gavin, from your perspective, any questions?
No, I haven't. I'd already been through this with Ian.
Sorry.
Yep. So no, I'm happy.
Okay. Back to you, Lynette. Do we need to, is there any formalities around the action register? Do we need to accept it?
Yes,
No.
please. Yes, please.
What's the resolution?
Just moving and second that the report be received.
All right. I'm happy. Well, it looks like Gavin's put his hand up, so he's moving that the report's accepted. Garth seconded it. I've agreed to it. So that's unanimously adopted. All right. Where does that take us to?
So your external presenters aren't here yet, so you'll need to carry on to item 5.3, which is your service delivery reform stimulus program.
Mr. Chair, can I just suggest maybe we defer that, only because I think it might be good to have Ruku present for that, and Jackie if she does come.
All right.
So I would suggest we go on with 5.4 and 5.5.
Okay, that's fine. Then we will go to agenda item 5.4, Waters Long-Term Plan Performance Targets Result, page 65.
Yes, so I can talk to that one. So this is our long-term plan KPIs. We do have the separate KPIs in the water care contract that's reported separately. There's just to be aware that in some cases the KPIs are different, and there's also some KPIs in the long-term plan that we haven't yet reported in the water care report. You can see from the scorecard report that all but 2 KPIs were met for the year. The 2 not met, one being the abatement notice in stormwater, and the other one being the real water loss. So with regards to, we're all aware of the stormwater one, but the real water loss, that one, I've had a look back at our results. We seem to be quite close to the line in previous years as well. It is worth noting that while the calculation is correct, the data behind it is likely to have some inaccuracies, and there are some estimates in there. There's a host of reasons for that. There's some data gaps. As you're aware, we read our meters in 6 monthly lots, so the billing side is not the same as the income side on the timing, and also during COVID lockdown, we had 2 meter routes that weren't read at all and were estimates. Back in 2012, Council actually did a report and identified some improvements to implement. A lot of those we don't believe have actually been done. There is also some in the 2015 Water Demand Management Plan. So Watercare are going to be reviewing those historical WDC recommendations to see if they're still appropriate and what can be done going forward to improve it. Of course, it will be subject to budget availability to implement whatever those recommendations are.
Could you, Carol, could you just expand a little on that? So the work, the review, what timeline are you putting around that? Is that within the course of this current year, or what's your proposal there to review those previous reports and recommendations?
I'd have to check with Watercare and Sharon to see when they'll have the capacity to look into those. So I haven't got that in front of me, sorry.
Sharon, is that something that you've already thought about, or is that something you want to take on notice and come back to us at a subsequent meeting?
We'll look at the demand management plan. We're pretty confident that Waikato District Council implemented none of the recommendations from the 2012 report. So we'll look at implementing some of those. For the demand management report, in the contract, Watercare was given 3 years to update that report, which means we've got a long time to do, but we're quite concerned that the report's so inaccurate and out of date. So we think we'll update the demand management report a year or two early and do it this financial year.
Right, so the bigger issue there is what extent can we rely on the information, and then if it's indicating to us we've got excessive losses in the network, is there anything we can do, or what can we do to reduce those losses?
I think realistically, the losses are probably somewhere in the mid to low 20s, which is still not great, but I think that the 25 to 33% is probably to do with inaccuracies in data, and we'll work through that. And I think there's potentially quite a bit of theft going on during the summer as well, and theft in the new developments as well, because the system processes for getting building water and things like that metered are not great at the moment, so we need to work through that. We had a lot of tanker theft over the summer, so we'll work to try and reduce some of those. And we'll also do some leak detection in some of the long rural mains, because we think there's probably quite a lot of undetected leaks in those mains. When you look at it township by township, Raglan's probably the best. It's about 17%, whereas Pokeno and Tuakau at the moment, about 40%. So I think we'll probably focus our efforts on Pokeno and Tuakau to start with. And that's Pokeno in particular is a function of the new development. And we just think the billing cycles and the new houses, there's just a lot of timing misalignments. And so we think we can bring that down by like more accurate data assessments.
Right. Morning, Ruku.
Good morning. My apologies. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I moved house in the weekend, and the internet coverage out here is pretty poor. So apologies for lateness. I'm assuming we haven't had the presentations.
Correct. And we've gone through the formalities. We've gone into agenda item, I have lost it again, 5 point something.
Four.
Anyway, it's the
5.4.
special infrastructure projects. Sorry, it's the report on the long-term plan performance targets results. It's starting page 65 of the PDF, and we were just having a discussion around the percentage of losses and work that's planned over the course of this year to at least get a better handle around what those losses are and what actions that might need to be taken. So at that point, I'm happy to retire from my role as interim chair. And Lynette, do we need to do any formalities now, or do I simply slide away and let Ruku take over?
Yes, you do. Yeah.
It's all yours, Ruku.
Stepping in. So with that, where would you like to go next? Are we going back up to the 5, or we'll go to the Three Waters Plus report?
I think we just need to close out on that discussion around the water losses. So Sharon's indicated there'll be work happening over this year. Garth, did you have any comments to make?
No, I think as long as it sounds like they've got a process underway to have a look.
I think at some stage we just need to note, maybe as an action, that for Watercare to come back to us and give us some indication of what is planned and what we can expect to see coming back through the course of the year.
Sorry, my comment, Ruku, would be that this has been a long-standing problem. And we realised that a reduction in water loss will be a significant improvement in terms of our performance as well. So it is a really target and key area for us to be addressing.
Yeah, I think it's quite crucial.
So then, if Lynette, so you've
Sorry,
key
Ruku.
action. Oops.
Ruku,
Can you hear me?
Ruku, you're cutting out on us again.
David, you take over.
Can I make a suggestion that David go back to be chair?
Yeah. Okay. We'll just see how we go.
Yeah.
All right, Lynette, have you captured that action?
Yes, yes.
And I'll leave it for Ian and Sharon or whomever to come back to us with what is a sensible timing and work plan or actions or report areas, rather than try and flesh it out now. Are you comfortable with that?
Yep.
All right. Anything else with regard to that report?
So I'm happy to move it, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Why don't I second it this time?
Yes.
All in favour? Unanimous. Right. Now, visitors have not arrived, have they? So shall we move on into the next agenda item?
Yes.
So does that take us to the performance report?
Yes.
So I presume, who's speaking to that?
Can speak to that.
Sharon?
Since I wrote it.
Good idea.
We've updated the health and safety reporting to the same format that we use for the Watercare Board in the officer report. We have struggled a little bit to do dashboarding because we just haven't got a lot of data, not having had a full year and not having had a lot of incidents, but we'll move towards that over time. So again, it was another month with no injuries or no, and this is talking about July. We did have an injury incident in the beginning of August where someone dropped a manhole lid on their finger and had to have medical treatment for that and a couple of stitches. But July was free. We did have an incident in Bowes Road in Huntly with a broken water main that saturated the ground, and we struggled to repair it because of the amount of undermining that it had done to surrounding infrastructure such as streetlights, and we needed quite deep trenches. So that actually took about 3 weeks to fix while we made it safe to fix. And it was on State Highway 1 as well, the old State Highway 1 through Huntly, but it still needed level 1 traffic management. So we worked through that and safely finished it. We did have a safety walk by a senior manager in July, which was the first one for Waikato District's operations, so that was good. With respect to KPIs, we did meet all of our KPIs in July, which is good, first time. So there's not much to say there. And again, operations were quiet. There wasn't a lot of unplanned failures in July, so we we could focus on some more planned work. There was a lot of business as normal incidents just in the treatment plant, small failures, calibrations, things like that, but no significant unplanned failures. And we took the opportunity to complete some training for the treatment plant operators, as it says in treatment. So yeah, nothing significant in treatment, and apart from the Bowles Road incident that I talked about in health and safety, nothing significant in the network space either. So that was good. In planning, now that the AMP's finished, the focus has definitely turned to construction and trying to get as many construction projects started as possible. We're about to tender the Tikawata water treatment plant upgrade, the Tikawata reservoirs, the renewals is out to tender at the moment. We've started the geotechnical work and stabilisation at Te Kauwhata wastewater treatment plant. So we're pretty much going full stream ahead on construction works now. And that's sort of planning's focus at the moment, is trying to get capital works out the door to start improving the network. With Mary Mary, we're still on track to lodge the 35-year consent application in the next week or two. So we're probably the first week in September now, just been a few delays by the lockdown in level 3 for the Auckland team that are managing that. Te Kauwhata, as I've suggested, we're preparing a consenting strategy for Te Kauwhata that we'll present to the next board meeting, but in parallel, we're starting works on site with the geotechnical stabilisation of the site. Ragland, we're still working through the options. We had a good, with iwi consultation and stakeholder consultation, so we're presenting them some options, but it is looking like we will need to retain a harbour outfall of some sort for the winter, because there's just really not any viable solutions that don't include that at the moment. Shared services, the transition for that is progressing, and we're on track to start on the 1st of October. Compliance, all our compliance reports were submitted on time, and we've had feedback from ARPS and the Waikato District Health Board that our data was accepted for the 2019-2020 drinking water compliance, and there was no gaps, so the sites will remain compliant. Condition assessment and asset remediation, we've started the first projects on site there with some wastewater pump station remediation, so that's going well at the moment. And yeah, I've probably talked already to the Raglan consent. So yeah, a steady month, just trying to get work started and getting things going on site.
Could I just make a comment? I think a steady month is a bit of an undersell. I think the amount of work that you guys are getting through and the amount that we're churning through is absolutely exceptional. So thank you very much to you and the team. It's just, we just keep on bashing it out, and it's fantastic. So yeah, a steady month is, yeah, a little bit conservative, if I dare say it. So thank you and your team.
Thanks.
Well done, Sharon, to Watercare Services team. Yeah.
So,
or Gavin, either. Gavin, go with you.
okay, so, and I was going to say that as well, Sharon, that I think just when you've rattled off all the things that are underway or going, I think that's really good and positive. So I guess we're going to add to that now with the Three Waters projects that will be coming when we discuss that later. I just wanted to, I guess, I've just got a couple of questions. One question is, you've talked about the Raglan wastewater and talked about the discharge into the harbour. Is that view shared by local iwi yet, or is that still, we're still working through that process?
We had and it wasn't in the report because it was actually in August, not July, but we had a 2-hour Zoom meeting with the iwi last week, and sort of explaining the options and the fact that the soils around Raglan are just not suitable for land disposal, and you'd probably have to go 20-ish k's away to get suitable soils. And we've done those investigations now. We've showed pictures of the soil samples. So we highlighted a few different options for different outfalls in the harbour to the iwi, and sort of just starting to open up the conversation that even though we would look to potentially enhance the treatment plant and have some sort of wetland getting re-energizing the water after being through the treatment process, that there probably was going to be some winter outfall, because the ability to have a year-round land discharge is just it's looking like it's being impractical. So there was an acceptance, but we are sort of starting to introduce the idea if that's where we're going.
Okay, thank you. One other question, and I'm not putting you on the spot here, Sharon. It is what it is. In terms of, so with the level 3 lockdown in Auckland, and that's had some impact, I know, on how we are operating or able to operate. And we accept that. Is that slowing down the planning work and slowing down the capital works program at all? Is that having an impact?
It is and it isn't. Originally, geotechnical investigations for Te Kāwhara were going to be done by Tonkin and Taylor Auckland, but we've just had to do it with Tonkin and Taylor Hamilton. Yep. Some of the meetings, like even the design team for the MBR is based in Auckland, so we've just had to do a lot more over the Zoom. Oh, the teams, Waterkey uses teams. There's 5 of us from the Waikato team that live in Auckland, so if there's been 5 of us that haven't been going to the office. And just for consistency across Watercare, we've sort of shut the Waikato office as well, and we've had most staff working from home even during level 2, just because it's easier to manage for Watercare if we're all working on the same restrictions. So we've had a few issues with suppliers getting across the border as well, like ChemFeed's one. So we've had to deal with the police to try and work through that. But yeah, Watercare Auckland procurement team's been dealing with that for us. So there has been some issues, but I don't think it's slowed things too much. It's probably just been a bit more work to try and get things going, if you know what I mean.
Yep. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Gavin, while we're with you, any other questions from the report? It's Garth, how about you?
Okay, a couple of things I just want to talk about around safety. So just checking that Waikato District Council are doing site inspections and safety walkarounds?
Not that I know of. The senior management walkarounds were actually one of the executives from Auckland came down to do a walkaround. So I don't think Waikato District Council is. Maybe you can help me out there, Carol, if they have been. I don't know. I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I know Lynn, our Zero Harm manager, asked me a week or 2 to say she was wanting to do something. Was going to get in touch. So it is on the mind, but I don't think they have been done.
So I can comment on that. So it hasn't. We haven't. But it is our intent to do that.
Okay, no, that's fine. Can you, I think it would be good for the board to do a couple of site inspections in the near term. So I think we've been remiss in not being out. So I'd like that minuted. I think 2 actions. One, that I'd like to see that the Waikato District Council are doing works inspections, and secondly, that perhaps we get out and around. Can I just ask about confined space training? What's the kind of process around that?
Confined space training. We're following the Watercare confined space procedures, which means you do a 2-day confined space training, and we use Safety in Action as our provider in Auckland and in Hamilton. And then Watercare, you also have to have a medical and first aid certificate to be able to access a confined space. Okay. We've trained all operators and all field reticulation servicemen, because they potentially may need to enter a confined space manhole or something like that. And the treatment plants, there's a couple of confined spaces as well. We use the risk decision tree. Watercare's got quite a process. There's a decision tree that you have to make, first of all, to determine whether it's a confined space or if it's not, and then the risk associated with that confined space, whether it's a dry well or a wet well, etc., etc., etc. And then we've got the Watercare form. So that's sort of our confined space procedure. Yep.
Who's in the photo that are working in the I think they're putting in, installing a new meter or a pump, is it?
Oh, that was repairing a water main there, I think.
Yeah. So I can see the aquacrops and things like that in the sort of thing, but it kind of, the picture doesn't look that good in terms of confined space and kind of what's going on around just making sure that the environment's safe for them to work in. But I don't have I've got a very narrow photo, so.
Yeah. They did, for that job in particular, I know they weren't harnessed, but they did have a rescue kit on site, just because the harnessing was limiting. I can provide some more photos. We actually put a lot of effort into making that site safe, and I agree the photo in the report's not the best for showing the safety requirement.
Lack of harnessing because it didn't work just worries me, because that's not normal procedures to have a ladder like that and no form of getting those guys out if something happens. They should have been harnessed, shouldn't they?
In Watercare, potentially they should have. I can look into that. Yeah. This excavation, and again, it doesn't look that good. It's only just 1.5 meters ish, so it's not a deep excavation.
If it's over 1.5,
yeah,
harnessed.
Yeah. Okay, I can look into that.
So I just want to make sure that the practices in the field are compliant with Watercare expectations and also the expectations of Waikato District. I know if that was my staff, they would need to be harnessed. Okay, I can. I'll look into that. Do you want me to report back next month? Just interested to make sure that we're not kind of, just because it's inconvenient, we're not using safety gear. Yep. That's all right. Just a kind of overview on that. The other thing you mentioned was, now you finished the AMP, is it possible to get a summary of that AMP? So just a high level kind of executive summary and the cost projections from that? Yep. Yes. And we could provide the PowerPoint summary that we provided last. That'd be great. Yep. It would be useful to have just those things we could see. I'll keep on. Yep. Thank you. That's all, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Garth. Right. Just a couple of questions from me, Sharon. The customer team, under the customer section 3.7 on page 82, it notes working around data cleansing, line metadata. Is that, do we have a major issue there with data, accuracy of data?
We have had this year. I don't know, this was reported in the media that AD Riley, who reads the meters, got attacked by some sort of virus and they lost a lot of their data. And so we had to do a lot of estimating this year. And plus there was also a whole round that we didn't do because of the lockdown at level 4 earlier in the year, where there was a whole round that was estimated. So I think there is more this year than there has been in previous years because of the AD Riley issues and the lack of meter reading for a couple of months.
So you alluded a little bit earlier to when we were talking around water losses, that you might have a bunch of non-technical losses or another inadvertent inaccuracies. So what's your sense? Is that a major issue?
I think it is significant when you only read the meters twice a year, and Pokeno was one of the meter rounds that was estimated. I think when you're, and especially in a fast growing area, I think it can impact significantly. Yeah. So hopefully as we read the meters again in a couple of months' time, we'll be able to do some more data cleansing and potentially correct some of this. And
I'd be right in presuming, therefore, it'll influence then the bigger exercise around losses and what we might need to do to mitigate or reduce. Yeah.
No, because arguably, I know in Auckland, the non-revenue meter, the equivalent losses in Auckland are about 16%, and arguably Pokeno and Tuakau should be similar to the Auckland losses, similar networks getting fed from the same source. So I think there is potential to improve things significantly in the areas when we get the data under control. So I don't think it's all actual water loss, so to speak. I think a lot of it's data.
certainly my experiences with electricity networks, particularly up in the islands, Pacific Islands, where I've had experiences that non-technical losses can be a lot larger than what one might think. They're the first obvious ones to look for.
I know in Auckland we've put a lot of, we read our meters 6 times a year, which improves accuracy, but we've put a lot of effort into improving data, and that's one of the main reasons why we've managed to bring our losses down from around 20% a few years ago. Right. So it's not actually finding water leaks, it's getting more accurate data.
Yeah. Okay, the condition assessments, I note that's completed there. Any big unpleasant surprises coming out of that?
No, it's as expected. The main issues are electrical control system issues, followed by mechanical issues. Civil structures are reasonably okay. So we're focusing on remediating electrical and control assets.
So that's all now through to the asset management plan, is it? So there's no need to amend the asset management plan to reflect what's come out of the condition assessments?
No, we've got some money to spend as part of the asset remediation budget in the next 10 months, which will hopefully get a lot of it. As the treatment plants the wastewater treatment plants are all going through significant upgrades anyway, so we're going to potentially wait for the bigger upgrade projects to do some of the treatment plant issues rather than short-term upgrades. So, yeah.
Right, well, that's good. Jackie, do we have you now on the call?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Hello, welcome.
Oh, thank you. My apologies for lateness, Mr. Chair.
No problems at all. I just can't see you. I just see a name.
Yep.
Right, excellent. We're in the monthly report, Jackie. Is there anything particular there you would like to comment or question of Sharon?
No, I've heard the questions from yourself and Garth, and they've covered off the questions that I had, so thank you.
Excellent. Okay, if there aren't any more comments.
David, apologies, it's Ruku here.
Oh, hello.
Hi, sorry. The technician tells me if I keep my video off, it should help. So I am listening to the conversation, and apologies if I'm covering old ground. The comments I have, thank you firstly, Sharon, I think in terms of providing more detail around health and safety. I just wonder though, for next time, if we could reconcile the commentary with the table. And unless I'm reading it wrong, for example, we've got LTIs and the comment, where are we? Yeah, the LTIs at 0, and then in the table, we've got it at 2.14. So unless I'm reading it wrong, if we could just kind of reconcile and align those two sets of information would be great. And
I could talk to that. One of them is a month assessment for the month, and one of them's a rolling average for the first 10 months.
Okay.
So hopefully once we've got a year's worth of data, we'll move to just reporting the rolling averages rather than month on month data, but we just don't have enough data at the moment to do that.
Okay, no, cool, understand. And just picking up on Garth's point around board site visits. So we did one, I don't know whether it was this year or last year, at the Ngaruawahia plant, but clearly, you know, it's important that we get around. So if we could just prepare, and I don't know if it's Sharon or someone on the council team, to just prepare a schedule that sees us get around to the various sites over the year would be really useful. Speaking
to that, Ruku, I'd certainly be keen to understand a little more closely site visits, particularly like the Raglan, the issues there, Te Kalwhiti, what we're doing there. So some of those major areas where either we're dealing with abatements, breaches to resource, or major capital, it would be.
Yeah, I agree.
But not in any way taking away from Garth's point, which is we should be doing health and safety visits as well to some of the more routine, see some of the more routine work underway. Yeah, I agree. And so perhaps we prioritise those where abatement notices are currently in place, but we schedule all sites over the course of
the year.
You're quite clear, Ruku. Do you want to take over chairing?
I'm happy to, if you don't mind not seeing my face.
Right.
Which I'm sure many of you would agree that is probably nice to not have to look at my face.
It wouldn't be appropriate as the retiring interim chair for me to make any comment.
Okay, well, happy to continue to chair and cross our fingers that I don't get any more disruptions. So thank you for the discussion and the report, Sharon. So if I take us to page 71, so the resolution is to receive the report. Can I have someone move and second, please? Thanks, Garth and David. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Right. Let's move now to, oops. Just going back to the agenda. David, can you remind me, are we now at?
I think we've dealt with the reports.
You just need to go back to item 5.3. Gavin wanted to wait until Ruku was with us.
Oh, great.
Yes, so Ruku, page 22, the service delivery reform stimulus program.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And we're still waiting for our visitors as well.
Okay. So okay, who's speaking to this paper? This is the Three Waters service delivery reform.
I can probably talk a little bit to that. It's quite a lengthy report. I'm assuming that everyone's had a read of it or are already quite well abreast in the information in it. The key part is we've got the MOU with the DIA that if we're going to enter into this and then proceed to request the stimulus funding, that we need to have that, the MOU signed in with the DIA by the end of the month. We then have another month to work on the delivery plans. We've been allocated, I think it's 2 lots of 5.33 million that we can apply for in funding. At the end of this report on we've got the projects that we're suggesting be included in
31.
Page 30 and 31. So we've been working with Watercare on identifying what would potentially meet the criteria and that we could realistically get done in the time frame. They must be started, I think it's by March 2021 and completed. It was initially the end of the year, but it's been pushed out, I think, to March 2022. It is worth noting that some of them will be subject to contractor availability. I suspect that the other councils will all be trying to get the same contractors to do some of these large chunks of work. So the projects that we've identified is funding for the future-proof study, Three Waters study, the detailed business cases, the additional resource that we've talked about, the engineering skill set, desludging. So we want to accelerate the works for Ragland and Narrawahia. Huntly's already got some money in the budget, but not enough, so covering the shortfall. We've got the SCADA telemetry upgrade and renewals, and also accelerating or extending the wastewater and water reticulation renewals. We've already got the 4-point-something million approved, but seeing whether we can do more in that space as well.
Okay. I'll open it up for any questions from the board.
Yeah, through the chair, Ruku. I was a little surprised to see studies fitting the criteria. Impression, rightly or wrongly, I had was that we actually had to be doing stuff that employed people on the ground, either way by way of renewals or maintenance or actual projects. So when I look, for example, to the further work on the sub-regional study. Is that likely to qualify against the criteria?
Can I speak to that? So this is a long-standing issue we've had with central government around the funding for this project. At the workshop, I raised it specifically with Richard Ward from DIA. He assured me we could use it for this purpose. I'm pretty sure Jackie would support that from the feedback she's had as well. And equally, the second piece, which is the detailed business case around the plants around Hamilton, that also has been also given the tick by Richard Ward from the DIA. So we are of the understanding that that is a suitable use of the money. Equally, it's part of the thinking is that we can, in part of the form, you have to talk about other councils. So ourselves, Waipa and Hamilton City can all say we're working collectively on this. So we're all using this source of funds to be able to facilitate those two projects progressing. So that is our understanding, David.
Okay, so which is good if that is the case. So would you be, or would we be applying as part of the regional component of the funding to have this done as opposed to the bit that comes to the specific to the TLA?
So let me fill that gap too. So the mayoral forum met last week and agreed unanimously that the regional portion would still be split in the same proportions that the individual council contributions were split. So we will get a further 5.67 million. So our total will be 11.34 million. But yes, in terms of how we show it, so Mayor Allen will write back to the Minister and to the DIA and explain that that was the decision of the mayoral forum on behalf of the councils, and that will then tick that box. It'll secure the funding for us and enable us, but we will show that as a regional project or the three councils collaborating to work together on that project. So that's kind of the thinking that we have on how that would work. To be honest, it is helping with what could otherwise have been a very challenging LTP problem for us next year without that funding, particularly around the detailed business case. Also, what's becoming clearer at the moment is that our contribution to those two projects is likely to be collectively about 1.1 million, 375,000 for the overarching study, and another 700 and what's got left, 775,000 I think for the detailed business case.
So sorry, through the chair again. So I presume from all of that the three councils will therefore all contribute to the study, assuming it meets the ministers and officials' criteria.
Yes. So just to perhaps explain, and Jackie can help me out if I get this wrong, but we're already into stage 2 of the overarching Three Waters study. Stage 1 was funded by the councils. Stage 2 up to a point has been funded by the councils already, but there is a gap, and this is to help fill that gap, which we thought was going to be filled by central government originally.
All right, well, just to finish on my part around those projects, I would certainly, in addition to that, I think the desludging would be a good one to make sure there's somewhere in the mix as well in terms of the issues there and some of our problems that we've had in the past.
That desludging one is in there, and that's our one of our top priorities in there.
Sorry, what was that comment?
The desludging, yes, is in there, and it's one of our top priorities. That and the one that Gavin's just talked about.
Yeah, certainly a good one to bring forward if we're able to.
Thanks, David. So my concern, Gavin, is, and it's in the detail, and have we done our own sort of internal legal review of the risks and implications of the MOU? So where what concerns me is there's reference in the MOU to the parties taking into account treaty obligations and iwi rights and interests. And I don't fully understand what the risks or implications might be for the council iwi relationship. And I acknowledge it says it's non-binding, but have we turned our mind to what those implications might be? And we haven't as an iwi, as far as I'm aware. I've sought clarification on that. But keen to understand if that work, if we have done our own internal legal review of the risks and implications, if any, of entering into this MOU.
Sorry, I went the wrong way. I muted myself. The answer to the question is, through you, Madam Chair, is that yes, we did. Christine did have a look at it for us, and I'll ask her to comment on it. It is very much a take it or leave it approach, and I understand why. From the government's perspective, they don't want to have 60 plus different versions of the same MOU. They want one version. And so it has been written, but it has been written collectively with involving Society of Local Government Managers and other parties as well inside the tent in terms of having those conversations. So I'll ask Christine just to comment on the MOU.
Thank you, Gavin. Through you, Madam Chair. So I was asked to review the memorandum and provide some advice in terms of the implications for council entering into it. The focus of my advice was not around the impact or potential impacts on treaty issues or iwi relationships. The focus of my advice was around the binding or otherwise nature of the Memorandum of Understanding and what that meant for council embarking on the Three Waters reform journey by signing the memorandum, and how that related to the subsequent documents that council would then be required to enter into to secure the funding, being the funding agreement and the program plan.
Okay, and your and in terms of the scope of your review, you're comfortable in terms of the position that council? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, but just making clear, the scope of the advice that I was asked for was around the implications of council entering into the MOU and commitment or future commitment to continuing with the reform program.
Yep, no, understand that. Thanks, Christine.
Through you, Madam Chair, just on that point, the way that I read the MOU in relation to treaty obligations is it's just leaving that wide open and acknowledging that there's a need for discussions with iwi to work through those mechanisms.
Yeah, that on the face of it, that's how I understood it as well, but it's never in practice, it never quite works like that. But but I guess, Gavin, I do respect that that will be the position that council will take in any case. So yeah, okay. Garth, do you have any comments on you're comfortable to enter into this MOU and the proposed projects?
Well, on the basis that we do understand that the government's direction is to head us towards a multi-regional water entity, the MOU is non-binding and effectively it's free money. So I think it very easily explain to ratepayers that we turn down free money when there's no specific commitment, as I read it. However, I think the next stage, or the next stage 2 grant, in which you have to sign a contract, does very much take you down a requirement to look at a multi-regional water entity, which I think is something that we need to think about strategically, and especially how that impacts on the water care contract.
Agree. Thank you.
So Madam Chair, if I can just make a couple of comments to that. So we have already started thinking about what the impacts would be as regards participation in the second stage, and also the impacts on our water care contract. So we had a meeting last week with Carl Tucker from Watercare to start to discuss what the situation would be, what's left to happen in terms of the transition period, and also what might happen if we were to delay that. And I'm not suggesting that that's a done deal, but we have to consider that as a possibility. Yeah, so I think that's the situation. The second point I'd make as well, Madam Chair, is that we did also, the Mayor and myself also had a meeting with Minister Mahuta before this came out. And in that meeting, we did discuss with her, amongst other things, that just raised with her our participation. She made it quite clear that she expected that we would participate in the first stage. She also understood our situation, that we weren't guaranteeing we would participate any further than that. So, you know, we'll have to work through this board in terms of to decide whether or not we go any further with this process.
Thanks, Gavin, that's helpful. Jackie, do you have any comments before on the MOU before I move to the recommendations?
Just want to comment on the points that Gavin just talked to. I think that is something that we need to think seriously about, the implications of the direction of the reforms program on our contractual relationship and arrangements with Watercare. So really happy to hear that that work is underway, and look forward to seeing that advice from the team. I'm not going to comment on the proposed projects for obvious reasons, but just picking up on your kōrero, Ruku, around treaty obligations, I do note that in all of the engagements around the reforms, the steering group has not engaged with iwi. I know that Waikato Tainui were invited, and others were invited to the local workshop, but I'd like to see Waikato District and others in the region really advocate for the treaty partners to be involved in all aspects of these discussions, because at the moment I know that it has a massive impact on local government. But as you indicated, Ruku, it could have other implications in terms of rights and interests. And I do note that engagement with iwi is something that's really been missing in relation to this reform program. So I'd be really keen for us as a board and Waikato District Council as an organisation to really, I guess, send a message to the steering group and the minister and DIA around the need to really adjust their method of engagement on this reform program going forward. I agree with Garth that the substantive issue is really in phase 2 or tranche 2, and really look forward to those discussions. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, if I can just add to what Jackie said, I agree with Jackie entirely that for me that's the big gap, because I haven't seen much at all from the steering group that is talking about the inclusion of iwi in the process. And I absolutely agree that it needs to be addressed and we should be advocating for it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. I think that's really useful and constructive. What I propose is that is the board comfortable as an action item following this discussion to send a letter to the steering group making that point to encourage or to review engagement with iwi going forward? It's not to interfere with the current process, but what was also clear to me is that iwi are not represented on the steering group. So I think this does need to, it would be good if this board was in a position to be able to advocate for that level of engagement. So before I put the recommendations, is the board comfortable for a letter to be drafted in that regard to go to the steering committee and the minister?
Yes, if I can speak, certainly happy to support that. The comment I would make in addition to it is, irrespective of the steering committee and what it does, it's within the control of Waikato District Council and the other PLAs as we engage on potential aggregation going forward to involve iwi in what might be our initiatives anyway.
Agree. It's the earlier engagement before we move into that more substantive process that I think is that is the point here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I've got a meeting with DIA this afternoon, so I'll raise it there as well, which will just say, expect a letter and here's our concern.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gavin. Garth, you're comfortable? Are you comfortable with that approach?
Yep.
Okay. Great. So I'll turn to the recommendations now.
Sorry, Chair, before we get to the recommendations, can I just pick up on just from the point that Garth was making earlier and around coming back to review our relationship with water care services and where we might be in relation to the reforms going forward. It's not binary. We could be, for example, using where we are with the proposed water care services as a model to bring in other TLAs. So this isn't binary situation by any means. So I would just encourage us and water care services at an early stage to be starting to think what this aggregation might mean, A, for our existing contract, and B, where we might collectively be positioning ourselves with regard to further entities being part of this or an amended model going forward.
Yeah, I agree. Let's be proactive in that space. Thanks, David.
And if you can just bear with me for a moment, if we are getting to the actual recommendations, I want to circle back to the point I raised first and come down to there's a dot point in the recommendations. It's in fact the last dot point before we get to and further that on page 23, where it notes the delivery plan must show that the funding is to be applied to operating and/or capital expenditure relating to the Three Waters infrastructure and service delivery, and goes on to talk around job creation. I'm struggling to see how funding a regional project complies with that requirement that the funding is applied to operating and/or capital expenditure. Or are we assuming the study is something that can be capitalised?
So, if I may, Madam Chair, so our interpretation of that is the second piece. It's related to, it is operating expenditure. It relates to increases and/or accelerates investment in core water infrastructure renewal and maintenance. that's the way that we've seen it. It is going to, these studies will facilitate acceleration of that project or those projects. So if we take the detailed business case, it will accelerate the potentially the development of a plant to the south of Hamilton and the upgrade of a plant to the north of Hamilton.
Okay, thanks.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'm okay with where we're all heading with this. I'm still a little concerned about us spending some time and probably being advised by the council what their thinking is around stage 2, especially. I mean, we are still part of the Waikato, so we still have Waipa and we still have Hamilton Council here, the Waikato Regional Council. So, you know, and the intent of this thing is actually to, you know, work towards, you know, these kind of more, or these larger, I guess, water municipalities. Now, my understanding is very much Auckland and Watercare should be heading north, not south, as we've known that for a while. You know, take David's points of view on board in terms of great model, how does this kind of work, but I think we've got to do some really careful thinking and some strategic kind of laying some strategic plans in place, not to get or to avoid being gazumped by a much bigger machine which is working in the background, being fueled by central government. So, you know, it's not a given that you get to stay the way we are, not at all. In fact, there's a lot of work going on that could be legislated in the park. And there's conversations around that as well. I'm party to some of those. So just think we, you know, it's not a, you know, a clear sailing here by any means for the current arrangements that we have and that, you know, we're governing.
In support of that, Garth, I think at a regional level, the councils have 2 forums where they've been coming together to kind of look at this at a more strategic level, both with the Future Proof group and I imagine these conversations are being had at the Merrill Forum as well, Gavin. So I think as a region, we have got those forums where we are testing the strategic case, but to support what you're saying, and I guess this is your advocacy, Gavin, with the other CEOs, is ensuring that as much as possible we are coming up with this best solution for the Waikato, and it's being driven by us. Jackie?
Yeah, I guess it's a question to Gavin about the, I'm really interested in understanding what the current discussions are around the future shape that the reforms could take. So what engagement you're having, Gavin, with, I guess, neighbouring local authorities, as well as those maybe further afield in the Bay, and what you're involved in there, and if you're not involved in any discussions yet, what your thinking might be to really front foot, I guess, the opportunity and design the strategy that best suits the Waikato and, dare I say, the Bay of Plenty, rather than have it happen to us. So really keen to understand what discussions you're involved in.
So through you, Madam Chair. So look, we've already had some discussions, certainly with other Waikato councils at a chief executive level. We have also had some engagement at a political level with some of the Bay of Plenty councils as well, and starting to explore what the possibilities may be to work with those councils as well. But I guess our feeling is that that's still not going to be big enough in terms of what the government is seeking, that in fact they are seeking to go larger than that, and we might even have to start to go further down into almost into the Manawatu as well. So we haven't had any engagement with any of the councils in that particular area as well. There is another scheduled meeting of the chief executives on Friday when this item will be discussed. And it's also a standing item now on the mayoral forum agenda as well. So that's probably a status of where we are at this particular point in time.
Thanks, Gavin. To me, this conversation is just further reinforcing the need to really have a close look at our contract with Watercare. And I guess what you mentioned, Gavin, around looking at those transitional arrangements and potentially deferring moving into the longer term contract, or really understanding what the legal implications of doing that might be under the umbrella or the context of all of this change.
Yep, agreed.
Good point, Jackie. If we can note that as an action for Christine, Gavin, I'm assuming in terms of those transitional arrangements and what our legal obligations are there.
So through you, Madam Chair, I was just have the contract in front of me. It's never far from my elbow, to be fair. And certainly through the contractual negotiations, the spectre of reform.
Madam Chair, could I just suggest perhaps we defer this to later in the meeting?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's appropriate given the confidential nature of it. Okay, well, I will now, we've also got our presenters online. So if I could, you're comfortable, David, in relation to the explanation given on the last bullet point at page 23?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'll put the recommendations as listed on page 23. A very fulsome set of recommendations which are reflected in the paper itself.
So, sorry, Madam Chair. Sorry to come late with a question. So my understanding is the criteria does say that the programs that are put forward for the funding can't be already budgeted for in the annual plan or LTP. So I just wanted to confirm that the projects put up meet that criteria. Aroha mai.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Ian?
Yes, they've gone through that filter.
Okay. Okay, so I'll put the recommendations. Can I have somebody move and second, please? Thanks, David. Thanks. Oops, I can't see Garth. Are you comfortable, Garth? Yep, okay. Thanks, Garth. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Against? Carried. Thank you. Good discussion. And we note the action points to come at right. I'll just double check with you, Gavin. So we've got Taipu on the line, is that right?
Yes, I'm on the line, Madam Chair. Morena koutou.
Thank you for joining us. Just to the board, one of our actions, or one of our commitments was to, as a board, get some training around a number of issues, and one of in terms of dealing with iwi, Māori, relevant to the Waikato is the Waikato River settlement, and the mechanism contained within that establishes the Waikato River Authority, and in particular the vision and strategy Te Ture Whaimana. And so Taipu is one of the senior leadership team from Waikato Tainui who will give a presentation. I'll let him explain the context, but for your information, Taipu, one of the guiding principles for this board is to ensure that we take into account Te Ture Whaimana when making decisions. So that's the context to this presentation today. Fine.
Madam Chair, if I could just say, following Taipu will be Julian Williams, who'll speak on behalf of the Waikato River Authority in terms of how they are going about implementing Te Ture Whaimana. Yep.
Thanks, Gavin, and to both Julian and Taipu. This was intended to be an in-person meeting, so apologies and thank you for your your time to present on Zoom, which is not always the best, but this has been a long time coming, so we didn't want, and it is important to us as a board, so didn't want to defer it any longer. So I'll hand it over to you now, Tai.
Morena koutou. Yes, sorry, you've got in team 2 here. I'm stepping in for our CEO, Donna Flavel, so hopefully I can do an admirable job in filling her big shoes. What I might do, I'm just going to share my screen. I have a presentation that we can go through, and then I'll step you through it. Can everybody see that? Great. As Riku said, yes, so what I'm going to do is go through, do some scene setting, I guess, probably in terms of the landscape that gave rise to the settlement itself, and then speak broadly in terms of what those mechanisms are, and as Riku Moana had noted, particularly around Te Ture Whaimana, but the mechanisms as a whole, because they're quite an important piece of work that the tribe did at that period of time, and we're a decade into it now, that it still has relevance today, and also some of the key principles, just so that you can get an understanding around what drives the tribe, particularly in the water space, and not only with the river, but water in general, and what the goals and aspirations are for us around our awa and our water in particular. So on that note, I'll kick into it. First off, I guess the first part of the presentation is going to do some quick background, and then look at some quick facts, and then I'll transition into the settlement itself. So again, the region itself populated for over 700 to 800 years. The river has been a spiritual sustenance and physical sustenance for large populations, not only Māori, but everyone that's lived along its catchment. Prior to 1863, we were the caregivers, I guess, if you can put it that way. In 1863, of course, as a significant history date, that's the culmination of the beginning of the land wars, the Waikato land wars. But prior to that, we were the caregivers and looked after and managed the waterways. And as a note down at the bottom there, it was a source of transport. It was basically the major highway to the interior at that time. Connected the Tamaki area with Waikato, and there was major trading going on, whether that was in flour, flax, and freshwater fisheries, plants, everything you can think of, and food. So quite a resourceful area in terms of the area that the Waikato presented, very fertile, and still to this day is probably regarded as one of the most fertile areas. So in that context, it was quite a valuable natural resource, a lot happening, and it could sustain quite a broad range of activities in the space. So that has pressures already on the water, as you can see back in that time. The catchment itself, again, quick facts that you guys probably already know, it's the longest river in the country. It produces geothermal coal resources. There's a number of freshwater lakes, peat-rich lakes in the lower Waikato as you get down. A lot of forest connected to that. And it's also traditionally had abundance of native fisheries and bird life. So the corridor that the river provides, again, not only through the river itself, but also along that whole stretch, and provides a massive ecosystem for our people, for the fisheries, the animals, bird life, everything you can think of. So quite a significant catchment in that context. Again, it's a highly national commercial significance. As you know, there's a number of energy companies that operate on the river, and we've got the hydro, we've got the the coal, we've got geothermal all operating on the river. So it produces about a quarter of New Zealand's electricity. And it can supply, if at push, provide 50% of the national energy at peak use. So quite a massive demand in terms of what it requires both commercially across the river. And it's important. Through horticulture and agriculture, again, as I said earlier, quite a fertile area. It produces 1/5 of New Zealand's exports, 10% of the national GDP. And again, just in terms of what it can provide in dairy, beef, the whole lot across the lamb, sheep, it's huge. So quite a massive contribution it makes, and then it supports in terms of these businesses. The environmental changes we've seen there over the years, we've seen the degradation of wetlands. I guess the only major one left is Whangamarino that currently sits in the Waikato catchment, or the major one anyway, the big one. There's of course the effluent and the dairy farm waste. I guess there's a stat there that talks about what it's equivalent to, but again, it's quite a major contributor to the impact that's having on the awa, on the river, on our water at the moment. There's a number of resource takes, and I guess the more immediate one that's in everyone's mind has been what's been happening with water care at this stage, and the pressures that's going on for supporting or supplying water to the Auckland region. But that's just one of many resource takes that take from the river. And there's also a number of point discharges. So again, as you can see, what's going in to the rivers is quite significant. The change in the last 10 years, I guess, for the lower Waikato River, where the tribe traditionally sits, things we've seen over the years, it's unsuitable for swimming, or it's at a state where it's not recommended that you go swimming in the river. There's high levels, I guess, raised levels of arsenic and bacterial levels are unsafe. Puts pressure on treatment of drinking water, particularly in the lower catchment, and there's been a number of algal blooms that have sort of presented themselves over the years. Also, one of the other impacts that we've seen against the landscape has been Indigenous biodiversity at risk. We know well that koi carp is the major contributor in terms of biomass in the lower catchment. Huge population growth within the lower Waikato, and yeah, causing significant issues in respect to its competition with the native species, which has led to, not just because of that, but there's been a decline in our eel population and the destruction of its habitat and species. So very, I guess, critical issue for us as the tribe, particularly in terms of restoration around our cultural and biodiversity in the region. So awa tupuna. So starting off to give you an idea about what the river means to us as a people. It's our ancestral river, so effectively we're saying that it's part of our DNA. We whakapapa to it when we get up and introduce ourselves as Waikato. Through our own genealogy, we always make reference to the river, and so to us it's a living ancestor. It's part of us, and sometimes it's a hard term to comprehend, but for the tribe that's what it is. We look at it as our living, breathing ancestor, and we derive our name and our identity from it. At times it's always been the go-to place for us as the tribe. It provides both the spiritual and cultural well-being, and that in the days when we've talked about it with our people and our old people, when there were times of need or were times of unwellness, the recommendation was always to go to the river, and that's why it's been intrinsic in terms of who we are as a people and why it's linked to us. And that so when there's issues that are affecting our river, it ultimately affects us as people, because we have a thought that the health and well-being of our people is intrinsically linked to the health and well-being of the river. So when the river is well, our people are well. When the river is sick, we're sick. So we take that position as a starting point, and why we always put the river in terms of its prominence up there for us as Waikato. So we do a number of activities, of course, along there, some that you may have experienced yourselves and been part of. We have the Koro Neihana, which just recently finished last week. We have our regatta. We have a lot of our wakama, wakatoa and kōpapa activities. It's still a food source for us in terms of gathering kai and food from it. In previous presentations, and one of the people who will be presenting after me would refer to this as our pack and save. The river was always that for us as a people. In times of need, that's where we'd go to source our food. It was the place that we could go to, and it was our pack and save to do that. What's happening over the last few years again has made that a bit more of a challenge, but nonetheless it's still something that our people do and we want to continue to do into the future. So improving the health and well-being of the river is becoming quite critical. And then there's also the recreational aspects of it. We do there, and regatta is part of those activities, but there's a whole lot of other activities that happen and what we can do and utilize with our awa. So the settlement itself, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this just to speak through some of this terminology. So the settlement is, I guess, probably in terms of just some context to that. Our settlement began probably in 1987 in more contemporary times when we filed our claim, our Y number Y30 with the tribunal. But what had happened during this period of time and the lead up to that was between 87 and 89, there was some may recall this, the Coal Corp case, where the government wanted to privatise the coal asset up here in Huntly. We had an issue with that in terms of it being an interest in the whenua, and so we took that issue to the court. Went all the way to the Court of Appeal, and basically the Court of Appeal agreed with us and noted that before the Crown could do anything with that coal asset, they needed to talk to Waikato first in regards to its issues around both raupatu and the like. So from that point on, in 89, when that court case was heard, we tracked the path of what's referred to as direct negotiation. So there's probably two avenues that you can go down in the treaty settlement path. The first one is you go through the whole tribunal process. You'll go through your hearing, you'll do your hearing, you'll get recommendations from the tribunal, and then yourselves and the Crown will sit down and talk about those recommendations and figure out a plan on how you may or may not choose to implement them. The second way is the path that we've tracked, and we've done this with all our settlements, is through direct negotiation. So we never went down the tribunal path, even though we put our settlement, our claim in there as one of the settlements under the Y number there. We decided to check the path, and that was as a result of what came out of that court case in 89. And so from there, we moved through a process with the then government at the time, the Labour government, and their desire to resolve it. A year later, there was a change in government, and National moved in, and then of course things started to escalate from that point on. And during that time, there was a strong drive by the National government to find ways in which they could resolve these treaty settlement grievances. And we, of course, in 1995, were the first to do that. And from that settlement, we settled our land issues, but we set aside a number of other matters, particularly being the river, the 4 West Coast harbours, and these 2 discrete land blocks that sit up in the Auckland area that we have left to do. And so from the 1995, we had the land settlement, and then we fast forward over a decade, which gets us to where we are today with the Waikato River settlement. And so from that point on, we talked with them between 95 around how we would go about resolving our issues around the river. Again, not the easiest thing to do, quite a complex issue without a doubt, in terms of dealing with it, in terms of dealing with these types of settlements. And to speak to it was, a challenge for everyone involved. But thankfully, in this time, we got there. And so what was driving us around that in terms of our settlement, in 1995, it was all about iriro whenuatu me hoki whenua mai. So as land was taken, so land shall be returned. When we spoke to the river, was about recognizing that as our ancestor, that we're inseparable and that we belong to the river. And so these words that you're seeing on your screen now are words that our negotiator, our chief principal negotiator Time Zero Te Kotahi Mahuta, led by and drove the vision around how we want the settlement to be. So it's really about putting an emphasis on the river itself and everything that's connected to the river. So when I speak about the river, it's a holistic view on that. It's not just talking about the beds, it's everything: the beds, the banks, the water, the fisheries, the vegetation, the tributaries. It's metaphysical being, it's the airspace above, it's the column, it's everything that you could encapsulate within the context of a river. And so that's what was driving us. The settlement itself, some key points just to note. Again, we wanted to make the river the primary beneficiary of the settlement. It was important to do that. We had to turn the focus around being on the user to the river itself, and then coming up with an idea around, or markers that would suggest to people that we need to figure out how we do that, and that importantly that we need to do what's in the best interest of the river. Sounds idealistic, but what we found that when we went out and talked to a lot of the people, stakeholder groups, community groups, everybody was in the same position. Everybody wants a cleaner, healthier river, without a doubt. The challenge was the speed by which we get there and the means by which we do that. There was always going to be the point of difference. And so the settlement has given us the platform to allow us to continually to work on that with the various stakeholder groups. And as will be presented later on, the WRA is another key factor of that part as well to help drive that through. Health and well-being ultimately is the priority as well. So not only that the river is the primary beneficiary, but its health and well-being has to be put up there, and that's where Te Ture Whaimana comes in. But when I talk about health and well-being, as I said earlier on, it's the intrinsic link between both that and us as a people, where the health and well-being needs to play. So quite a holistic view around that, and that leading into that last point that, yep, there is a need to identify the health and well-being from an environmental perspective, but we talk about that right across all the four bottom lines. And so it has to achieve it at a cultural, social, environmental, and economic level. And we can do things, and I know when the word economics is talked about, it's quite a can seem like oil and water sometimes when you're talking around health and well-being, but we need to do it in ways that aligns to Te Ture Whaimana, aligns to the principle of putting the river first, and that it becomes the beneficiary of any settlement. So these things can occur. We've just got to do it in a way and put thinking around it that aligns to those core values around how that river should be valued and regarded in the decision-making process. Another key feature of the settlement, which is becoming more common these days, is this concept around co-governance. Now, in the time that we were doing this, there wasn't really that thought. There was opportunities around, but nothing had really eventuated. And also too that we were in a position where we wanted to talk to and sit at the decision-making table. One of the other things too with this settlement, with the river one, it was uniquely different to what we did in '95. And what I mean by that is that traditionally in your treaty settlements, the government will likely sign your settlement, give you your land or whatever assets you got, and then sort of say, go on your merry way and do what you need to do. We couldn't do that with this settlement, largely because we view this as a generational settlement or multiple generational settlements, because the restoration of the river is going to take more time. It's not going to be like a land settlement where you can resolve the grievance immediately. We needed to find a way that we were able to hold the Crown to account for what they've allowed to happen within that catchment over a period of time, and then keep them tied to us for that time and work together under principles of partnership to work on the health and well-being. And so one of the concepts that came up of that was the co-governance as a principle, and then that sort of rolled into what we've done with the WRA, our JMAs as example as well, of where we would look to position ourselves to actually speak to and for the awa in these forums. And so the co-governance became the mechanism by which we could hold the Crown to account keep them as a party to the settlement so that they could work with us and address the concerns that we've had over these number of years to deal with the challenges that the river's faced back then, still facing now. So co-governance became the vehicle by which we could do that. And so the principles of our settlement are grounded in two key areas. Manoa Te Awa, which in the tribal lens is about the river as a living ancestor, and Mana Whakahaere, which is about control and authority. But what we needed to do was reflect these principles in a way that would be inclusive of everybody. And so, as I said earlier, when we went out and did our 3 years of engagement, as it was turned out to be before we settled, one of the joining factors that was clearly obvious amongst everyone was that, again, everyone wanted a cleaner, healthier river. They wanted cleaner water. There was no dispute about that. And so Manoa Te Awa for us then became a health and well-being of the river, and it actually connected everyone across the whole river. So it became a whole of catchment approach, and that's what Manoa Te Awa focuses on. Mana Whakahaere then became the means or the implementation of what we needed to do. So again, as I said, with the principle of the settlement around co-governance, co-management, that's what Mana Whakahaere reflected. One of the other, I guess, aspects of it too was that ownership wasn't being discussed or wasn't on the table at the time, even though from a tribal perspective, it's still something that we're quite keen on pursuing. But in saying that, there were rights being created akin to ownership. And so co-management to an extent helps us get to that point where we're a feature in terms of decision making, and that there is a voice for the river going forward, albeit the tribe leading that charge, but there is a voice. And so co-management, holding entities and the Crown to account and working collectively together in addressing the challenges and issues for our river. And that's what the river settlement's focused on, and what all the other mechanisms that have come from the settlement springboard off as well. And so what that meant practically in terms of the new river co-management, the Manoa Te Awa, again, a whole of catchment approach, looking at it at the health and well-being of the river, reflecting that in the principle, reflecting the views of not only us as Waikato, but those groups we've talked to, including other river iwi, including stakeholder groups. They were all part of that. And it was about protecting our river and all its resources and finding ways in which we can do that together and creating means that would actually sustain it for future generations. Mana Whakahaere, again, co-management for Waikato, it became about exercising traditional rights of guardianship. As I said, ownership obviously not on the table, but again, it's a stepping stone for us. And so this exercise of our traditional rights of guardianship became quite a key feature. And we do that in a partnership with our partners in all we do. So the historical overview in terms of the river settlement itself. So these are the sort of the key outcomes that have come from it. So what we reflected in terms of the whole of river approach, the whole of catchment, health and well-being being the priority. It had to be a holistic approach to that in terms of what they would deliver under the settlement. And so again, as I said, it needs to deal with all four bottom lines, or the four well-beings that we all sort of speak to these days. It produced Te Ture Whaimana, the key feature of that. And so the Te Ture Whaimana as a policy, again, strategically for the tribe, if we couldn't be in the decision-making role, we needed to identify ways in which we could actually influence or help guide decision makers when they're making their decisions around the river. And so this is where the Te Ture Whaimana really hits home in terms of that decision making process. We know that we can't be everywhere at all times, but importantly, that if we can create a policy document, and for this one, I guess the policy setting document for the Waikato River, it's actually going to be quite helpful to actually ensure that those principles around Manoa Te Awa, health and well-being, are always at the forefront of those decision-making processes. And that's where Te Ture Whaimana really hits home and really puts an emphasis on those decision-making bodies to have particular regard, or to an extent give effect to that policy. From that also came, I guess, in reflection of Manawatū, was the Waikato River Authority. Again, that was our mechanism which we could actually pull together all the key parties, including River Iwi and other stakeholders, including the Crown, in that body, and we would work together collectively to actually achieve the vision of Te Ture Whaimana, be the advocates for that, as well as, I guess, probably looking at what we would do regards to restoration, which is another feature of what the River Authority does. But primarily, I think to be the advocates for Te Ture Whaimana is one of the key features for the WRA. And then lastly, we had our Kingitanga Accord, which is another mechanism that we've tied into the settlement that helps us reflect annually with the Crown on how the settlement's moving and whether or not these mechanisms are working. And as I said, we're roughly just over a decade into the settlement. As I said, things are becoming more normalized as we go through that, and not as scary for people as they originally were at the outset. And so as we go through that, we go back annually with the Crown just to reflect on how the settlement's moving and to ensure that we're actually achieving what we set out to do back in 2008. And so mana whakahaere from a settlement perspective, sort of envisaged in these 5 key areas. We have accords with Crown agencies and our JMAs with the local government entities. And these are all, I guess, to an extent, an extension of what we've done in the river settlement, but they are also, in some regards, mini settlements themselves, given there's a number of activities that we've agreed directly with those agencies and with the local bodies around how we'll work together in implementing a number of these, implementing the river settlement, and we'll work together on that. That also includes our delivery on Te Ture Whaimana and working on those numbers of activities as well. And we do that with those various agencies and local bodies. It's about tangible outcomes so that we can reflect and show to our people how we exercise our mana whakahaere. So this includes working across entities for restoration purposes, decision-making bodies, being part of processes such as this and bodies such as this, river initiatives, ultimately about empowering our people, which is one of the key things that we need to do, and then rights protection. And then right at the bottom there, you'll see that statement, restoring and protecting the health, well-being of the river for future generations. That's the overarching purpose of what the settlement is. And it just harks back to a point I said earlier around that. At the end of the day, when we're making decisions, we've got to think about what's in the best interests of the river. And that's really where our starting point is as a tribe. And so when we do that and we talk to things like Te Ture Whaimana and its active role in what we have to do as a community in regards to achieving the health and well-being, this is what we push back to. We got to think about it, whether it's a consent, whether it's an activity, whether it's an initiative, whether that's a recreational activity, whether there's things happening on the land. We've always got to think in the front of our minds as well, what would be in the best interest of the river? How can we undertake the activity so that it aligns to Te Ture Whaimana, and looking at it from that point rather than saying, this is just purely, it'll give us great economic outcomes, and that becomes the primary decision-making factor for it. Whereas we got to be more holistic in our decision-making processes. And so that's where the tribe sits on that, and why it's always been quite important and a continual journey for us with everybody around expressing what that means, and why we always elevate it in our discussions and around, I guess, what we wanted to do in regards to dealing with the issues or the landscape that the river was facing. And so just to sort of extend a little more, and apologies for boring you all, but we're nearly at the end. So really it is about improving the health and well-being again, not just a commodity. And I think this is where we need to be thinking more holistically, and that it does encapsulate a lot of things where the river is, and particularly around water. Water is the most topical thing at the moment, and again, you know, whether that's in terms of its health and well-being, its impacts and effects that are going on right at this moment. Yeah, we really think about it from that whole point of view, but then what its relationship is to all the other things that are connected with the river, including its beds, banks, floodplains. There's always a flow-on effect, to excuse the pun, with the river, but there's always a flow-on effect. If one thing's impacted on, then more than likely something else is going to be impacted on as well. So it has to be thought about it as a whole piece rather than these individualized into these separate compartments, that it's regarded as that whole entity or that whole being. Hence why Manawatau was about the whole of catchment and bringing that focus to it as a complete body, and then looking at ways in which we can do that on the ground through the mana whakahaere around how we would address those issues or those challenges we might identify under that. I think there's only a couple more slides, guys. So new area of co-management, was earmarked for government funding. So from that we were able to establish the cleanup fund, and it was then invested into the Waikato River Authority. And just quickly, as you know, and it'll probably come up later in the presentation, it's a 5-5 entity, 5 river iwi and the 5 Crown appointees that sit on there. And I guess two primary functions, as you again will be spoken on later, but there's the vision and strategy for the river, and then there's the cleanup trust that it does in terms of the restoration and support for projects along the river. The vision and strategy, again, from a tribal lens, is probably one of the key activities that the River Authority has in and around Te Ture Whaimana, and just making sure, as I said, being the advocate for that, ensuring that they're keeping everybody, including ourselves as Waikato, to account on how that policy and that document needs to be implemented and rolled out. And so here's just a quick visual of how it looks. So as you can see from the whole Waikato River catchment, the vision and strategy applies. And the other, I guess, one thing I did fail to mention around the vision and strategy was that it then gave or provided consistency across the whole of the catchment. So you weren't having separate policies dividing up or cutting the river up into different patches where different policies would apply. The value of the Te Reo Whaimana was that it created one consistent policy that would then govern the whole of the catchment. And so you wouldn't have any, potentially you wouldn't have any clashes between the various sectors along the river, because they're all operating under the same or being guided by the same vision and strategy or policy document for the river. And then when you flip over to the mana whakahaere or the co-management, this is where I guess it goes down to the more direct relationships that I guess Waikato has with the agencies, with the local authorities in our tribal area. And this area here marked in grey, the dark grey, is where from Karapiro down is where Waikato's rohe resides, and where we will work with the various groups, whether that's stakeholder groups such as Mercury or Watercare, Hamilton City, Waipa, Waikato, and the local authorities and the regional council, and how we would work together to actually find ways in which we'd implement or deliver on the health and well-being, including Te Ture Whaimana or the vision and strategy. But it's for us as iwi and for our partners to work that out, as it is the case for the other iwi further up the stretch, to work out with their partners around how they'll go about that, all at the same time knowing that they're guided by the one key document that will help hopefully link and combine and create the consistency that we need across the river catchment. And so just a depiction of how the settlement works as a whole. just to show you, and there's some things in here I didn't talk about particularly, but at the top of the settlement is the principle of mana o te awa, and so everything we do that came from the settlement drives towards that. It drives towards the health and well-being. And then there's the various entities that have been established under the settlement, and so below that one, we have the River Authority and the two key pillars for it in terms of its operation, Te Ture Whaimana, the vision and strategy, and then the Cleanup Trust. And then the blue is what we do as the tribe. And so that's the activities or the initiatives that have come from the settlement that we have that are all about driving towards that key principle of mana o te awa. And at the bottom, is mana whakahaere, and so it's driven from the ground up. So our partnerships, whether that's Crown agencies, whether that's local body with the tribe, are driving from the ground up. So it's not a top-down relationship or an activity. We're actually coming from the ground up, from the flax roots, to help drive a number of things, so that at the end of the day we're moving towards mana o te awa and the health and well-being being the critical element of that. And through there you can see a number of other initiatives that we have in regards to the settlement itself. So that's the presentation. Sorry it was quite long, but again I just wanted to finish on this Mamai Aroha that we use again, and the River Authority uses this within their framework as well. It's a saying that was said by the second Māori king, Kingi Tāwhiao, as he was being exiled from his whenua. He turned around and he took a snapshot, basically a lament of what it was, his whenua that he was leaving behind, but it was a marker for what the whenua looked like as well. So he talked about all the mountains, the waters, as he was making his way down into the King country at that time. And he talked about, and we've taken one of the excerpts from that Mamai Aroha, or that lament. Tōku awa koe ora me ona pikonga e kura tangi o te mātāmuri. So translated quite eloquently has been the river of life, each curve more beautiful than the last. And that's really talking about us continuing to move forward, finding ways in which we can actually get the river back. It's already beautiful now, but there's always more we can do. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Tai, and thank you for that presentation, not boring at all. I'll just open it up for any questions, but for the board, I think it was important to have that context given our role, and we're often talking about the impact of others' actions, including ours on the river. I think what that presentation did is give an understanding of how the tribe and its people connected with the river pre-1863. Then it talked to the challenges since then, which and many of those still exist today. But what is also clear is the leadership of the tribe to work for and with the river and communities to restore and protect the river, culminating in the river settlement. So I do think that we will, over the course of our time as a board, break the presentation up into more in-depth sessions with Taipu and Donna. But any questions of Tai for now before we move into a presentation from Julian on the role of the Waikato River Authority? Sorry, David, you're on mute.
Right, let me come off mute. Let me start again. Firstly, kia ora Taipu, and thank you very, very much. That was extremely helpful from my perspective. So no questions, but just an observation. And I'm just left wondering how we incorporate the views and obligations that come through that settlement as we start to think around the job we're doing, but equally the aggregation of water entities and where all that sits in relation to these, to give effect to the settlement. So I think just an extremely useful perspective and a starting point for equally for our journey.
Totally endorse that, David. It's my perspective too. Very interesting and informative. Thank you.
So it's left me with more questions than answers at this stage to think through. So you've done well.
Without a doubt, it's quite a complex issue, and even though we're a decade on from the settlement, it's still not an easy journey to traverse. And there's ebbs and flows again. Excuse the pun, but with the whole settlement itself. So you guys doing a fantastic job as it is now. So I'll leave you guys to it.
So, Ruku, if I can just make a couple of comments. So from again, I echo the sentiments of Garth and David. I thought it was an excellent presentation, Taipu, and I certainly don't feel like we got the B team. I think we got a very, very well-rounded presentation, and you clearly knew what you were covering. For me, what it's made me remember is, as you talked about, the really binding thing from a council perspective was the health and well-being of the river. That was really what came through when we were thinking about the JMA and those kind of arrangements. And that for me was always the catalyst that said, hey, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. So the presentation just really reinforced that again for me. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Kevin. Jackie, any comments?
Just want to say thank you to Taipu for presenting. It has been a long time coming, and I guess for Ruku and myself, we take it as a bit of a given that people understand, our board colleagues understand the context that the Waikato district sits within and that the board operates within in terms of the Waikato River catchment. So I just want to say thank you, Tai. I think it's always good to, I guess, have it reinforced that restoring and protecting the health and well-being is at the forefront, that the whole river settlement was developed on that basis. Really, Manawa Te Awa, as Tai has alluded to, and I guess that the co-governance and the JMAs and what's coming through the likes of this board is really around, I guess, giving effect to mana whakahaere as well, the other core principle of the settlement, as well as acknowledging that achieving the goal of restoring the health and well-being of the awa is not a task that any single entity can achieve by itself. And so we all need to be working towards that goal. I think 10 years on, we're certainly, as Tai mentioned, it's starting to become normalised. I don't think it's quite there yet. And some of the decisions that this board have made in recent times, particularly around the investment in wastewater treatment plant upgrades and the catchment, I do believe that we are giving effect to that intent, particularly around mere mere and what will come into Kōwhata. So I think we're on the right track. I would really like to see our decision making and the recommendations that staff bring to the table, particularly in relation to the Waikato River catchment. But to me, it makes sense to apply it across the district to be an assessment that reflects how those recommendations are giving effect to Te Ture Whaimana to be presented as part of, I guess, the material that's presented to us and the process that the team go through in reaching those recommendations. I think at the moment it's sort of happening by default, but it would be good to just really embed and institutionalise that thinking at all levels of the organisation. It's something that I think a lot of resource users, this is not just councils, but developers are really struggling with, is to move beyond sort of looking at the vision and strategy document and just saying that the proposed activity fits it, to actually demonstrating how it fits it. So I think that's a challenge for staff. It's certainly not something that sits just with Waikato District Council or Watercare staff. It's a challenge that sits across all developers and all local authorities within the Waikato River catchment. So that's something that I'd like noted for, I guess, our team, and something that I think warrants further discussion across the local local authorities and other entities within the Waikato catchment to really do that well. But I think that it's something we should be focusing on now that the vision and strategy is becoming more normalised and part of our sort of everyday dialogue, being able to demonstrate how we're giving effect to it.
Thanks, Jackie, and agree. And I know that given that's something you've been working on with the staff in terms of how we can embed it into our this decision-making matrix. So let's pick up on that going forward.
Madam Chair, just one other thought. I know one of the conversations I've had with Bob Penta and with Julian was about actually this presentation to staff as well, to help to inform and to actually provide that context and that background about why this is so important. So I'd like to probably twist Taipu's arm as well to say, if we can look to provide the background, the history as you have, and then how the Waikato River Authority is dealing with it as well, I think would be hugely beneficial to our staff as well. So that's my thinking in terms of the next stage, informed by Julian's idea. So, yeah.
Hear himself again. But the two go hand in hand. Tribal context, and then the Waikato River Authority will help bring that deeper understanding. So Taipu, thank you. You're welcome to stay to Julian's presentation, but appreciate you've got a number of other things to attend to. So thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all. Yeah, I need to leave for another meeting. So have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll hand over to you. And I just want to just acknowledge that I'm not on video, not because I don't want you to look at me. It's I'm having connection issues, so apologies for that. But as we've said today, we had arranged for the board training, and we wanted to start our session with getting a deeper understanding, particularly for our colleagues, on the river settlement and the establishment of the Waikato River Authority. So we'll hand it over to you, and again, the board will provide commentary at the end.
Oh, kia ora, Ruku. Thank you for the introduction. And even though Ty's popped off, he's really set up a good platform for our presentation this morning too. And thanks, Gavin, for the invitation. It's good to see everyone this morning. Yes, I'll get straight into it if that's okay. And Gavin, I'll follow up on that opportunity to come and talk to the team at the council. We spoke to Regional Council 3 weeks ago, and at a recent presentation at the New Zealand Planning Institute, local one, it was one of your staff that asked if we could come and talk to the team so that they could better represent the vision and strategy when they're dealing with consents. So yeah, a bit of a roundabout one, so thank you. So Ruku, if you don't mind, through the chair, I'll get straight into the presentation, if that's okay. So I'm gonna share my screen as well. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
So, sorry, there we go. So I'm not going to go into the background detail that Taipu has just done, but he set us up well. And so for the River Authority, it's about just presenting why the governance board we have, why it was chosen. Taipu's touched on some of that, also what our overall objectives are. maybe some implications, well, maybe some consideration in council policy to demonstrate the reach that the vision and strategy has at a national level, as well as down into district plans and consenting and all activities that operate within the Waikato River catchment. Also, we'll be touching a bit on the funding and our review of the vision and strategy, because that's going to be a major piece of work for the Waikato River Authority and everyone that has responsibilities within the area. So as Taipu said, these coloured areas are the reach of the Waikato River Authority and Te Ture Whaimana, the vision and strategy, established under the Waikato Tainui Settlement Act as the Waikato River Authority, a unique co-governance, and I'll touch a bit on that on why. And sorry for those that don't know, Taipu and I were in the same team for about 10 years prior to moving into different spaces, so I'm not making this stuff up. It comes with a bit of experience. So each river, we have 10 members. The Waikato River iwi appoints a member each, and the Crown appoints 5 through the Minister for the Environment in a kōrero with Minister for Local Government and Māori Development. The Regional Council provide a representative as well as one for all local authorities. Currently, the Regional Council member is Stuart Kneebone, and the local authority representative is Paula Southgate. She's also our co-chair. And we have 3 independent members also, of which Jackie, good to see you this morning, is one of those. Legally, we're a body corporate, so we act to be independent, but I just want to touch on what Taipu said. We're here to achieve the overarching purpose of the Waikato River settlement, the Upper River iwi co-management arrangements, and the Maniapoto Ngā Wai o Waipa settlement as well. The river iwi, not boundaries, some part of the area of responsibility is just shown here. In each of these areas to restore and protect the health and well-being of the Waikato River for future generations, and all it embraces is Area A. As iwi don't like to follow each other too closely, the Upper Waikato one made 2 word amendments to their overarching purpose, which included present generations. And Maniapoto in 2012 went totally wide and have included stuff around Māori as well. But regardless, our 3 functions are here to achieve those three slightly different overarching purposes. But in general, when you meet with provincial farmers, they all understand restore and protect the health and well-being of the Waikato River. Why the form of governance structure that has been chosen? And as Taipu said, it was maintaining accountability by the government. With the land settlement and many settlements, the government have an opportunity to provide what they call redress. It's never fair, and it's never means that the Māori are equal or even now from past grievances. And so instead of letting the government walk away, we noted that they should be at the table for this length of time while the authority is still established. So it was about keeping the government accountable. Co-governance was the focus. As Taipu said, it's not about ownership of the awa. It's a later discussion for the river iwi to have. And it recognises that everyone holds responsibility for the awa. And this is reflected in the extent that Te Ture Whaimana reaches into 20 pieces of legislation. It's an independent entity. So how we see it is it should be an independent voice for the awa that supports the aspirations of the river iwi. The mana sits with the iwi, and the Waikato River Authority is a mechanism to swing the bat every now and then to take up some spaces that won't take up too much time for the iwi, so we can deal with some of these things at a national level, and we need to be working stronger in those spaces. So it's about providing another angle to support Waikato River iwi aspirations in terms of achieving te mana o te awa and mana whakahaere. We're funded by taxes, so we need to be transparent. We're independently audited, and we had a big audit last year too around our effectiveness. And so, yeah, this was another way of us being more accountable, and especially noting that our funds come from taxpayer funds. And one of the strongest things is that the WRA cannot be disestablished by the government. It can only be disestablished by Waikato Tainui, because it's under that legislation that we were founded. The functions are pretty simple. Set the primary direction through the vision and strategy to achieve restoration and protection. So being kaitiaki under Te Ture Whaimana, the vision and strategy, promote an integrated and holistic approach, and fund rehabilitation initiatives. So it's pretty simple, 3 things. If you look at number B, the integrated approach, one of the key issues was that while we have 20 pieces of legislation that are impacted by the vision and strategy is because the multiple responsibilities held by local government, DOC, fisheries, MPI, MBIE. And so there was nothing to coordinate all those responsibilities to the river. So the vision and strategy was about influencing all of those decision makers. And the only way to influence a decision maker is to influence the house that they sit in, and that's legislation. And that's why Te Ture Whaimana sat above that. The terms of the trust, I'll talk a bit about that later. So our vision to achieve, as Taipu has mentioned, tōku awa koiora, me ona pikunga he kura tangihia o te matamuri. At every bend, she is more beautiful than the last. And that's maybe if you're heading down towards Taupo, you could say that, and we want to make sure that happens throughout the whole of the river, including the Waikato, Waipa. So it's for 3 key things here. And what's so beautiful about this, our vision is for a future where the Waikato River is healthy, sustains abundant life, prosperous communities, is because legislation allowed us to just do this. If we had gone through a consultation process, we'll be sitting here for 10 years still trying to figure out what an overarching purpose would be. So it gives us a couple of things. It gives us a vision, restore and protect. This isn't any activity within our space is not avoid, remedy, mitigate space anymore. It's not under the RMA because restore and protect, Te Ture Whaimana sits above that. And so it's more positive, it's more future focused. Even if you look at the essential freshwater package now, I think it's maintain and restore. Maintain wasn't strong enough for the River Iwi either. So we operate in a different space. And when you're thinking about some of the works you're doing, it should always be about restore and protect, not avoid, remedy, mitigate. That's not balance. It also talks about who it's for communities, and it's for the future generations. So that's the time frame, the future generations. So we've got 3 key things there, and it's really important. What we don't, well, some of the feedback we have had is like, provincial farmers saying, Julian, we know what's best for our areas. Some of the agriculture, horticultural teams up in Pukekoi, we know what's best. Tell us what you want. Iwi, tell us what you want. River Authority, give us your aspirations and help us figure out how to get there. Don't tell us how to get there because we're probably, the WRA isn't the best person in some cases to tell people how to manage their lands. Defining the river, a lot of people think we're just talking about the stem or the Waikato River, Waikato Iwi. Define the river that applies to us, waters, beds, banks, minerals, streams, waterways. We got a little bit clever from 95 to 2010 and we now include water column, airspace, substratum, wetlands, islands, springs. So it's everything within the catchment. And a reminder that it's a single indivisible being. When we look at where it sits amongst the hierarchy of documents that may influence Waikato District Council, I would have the vision and strategy section there in the green on the right higher. I just couldn't fit it on the screen. So it sits above there because it prevails only over any inconsistent provision. Anything must give effect to the vision and strategy, and when you get to the regional policy statement, it must not be inconsistent with the vision and strategy. And as Jackie noted, what people want now is guidance on what that means. And that's a space we need to start developing. What does restore and protect mean to Waikato? What does it mean to Maniapoto? And how does the River Authority push that through? So these are some of the workshops we're going to have to progress with our Waikato River Iwi partners. It would be also handy to know from the council, what does restore and protect mean to you for your works, infrastructure, subdivision developments, providing for water. It'd be really nice to understand that. So hopefully we can discuss some of those things when Taipu and I don't know if he said yes, Gavin, but when Taipu and I come along to do the presentation. And so I just wanted to show here that the vision and strategy is the primary direction setting document for the whole of the Waikato River catchment. Understand some of your spaces sit outside the Waikato River catchment. What we try to do with regional council is push that further. So this is where it sits, and it must, all actions and activities must be given effect to. This would be a really good discussion with your planners, Gav, as we're moving forward. Now we've got those three things around collaboration, Te Ture Whai Mana, kaitiakitanga, and funding. So at the top of this all is the vision and strategy with our 13 objectives. Then we do some funding every year. So we've just completed our 10th funding round. And then we are working to better collaborate with Waikato River iwi and local authorities. And then how do you know we're doing a good job? Well, we need to review ourselves. And one of those tools is the Waikato River report card, developed with the River iwi and MFE and Council and led by Niwa. So we're currently working through the second iteration of our report card now to see where things have changed. Now, to achieve the restore and protect, it's not written in legislation, but one of the things we've heard is that it's going to take 80 years for some of the water quality lag, the impacts to come through. That doesn't mean all of the 13 objectives should be given ourselves 80 years to achieve them all, because I'm pretty certain recognise and protect wāhi tapu could be done within 20 years. Fisheries improvements could be done within 20 years. Waikato Tainui has the 2050 target. I think Raukawa wanted 40 years. So the overall package might be 80 years, but each of these objectives we think we can achieve much quicker than that. But noting water quality is going to take a little bit longer due to lag time. When we're talking about the Waikato District Council, just as effect of the vision and strategy on planning documents, again, it prevails over any consistent provision. And if a document under Section 55A, the RMA, the NPS and all those planning documents then flow down to the District Council, it must not make any amendments that make it inconsistent with the vision and strategy. So anything that's been asked to be implemented at a local level from a national level must not be inconsistent with the vision and strategy. And that's really important to determine its impact locally. And so these are just some examples of when you undertake your reviews and the effect of vision and strategies on consent conditions. Now, the tough part is that the vision and strategy is at this higher level, but when you look at the JMAs and the schedules that you have around monitoring and enforcement, there's opportunities there for iwi to trigger a review of conditions. And the vision and strategy, this section 14 is about enabling that, helping what each iwi want in those spaces to any consent within the Waikato district area. As Taipu said, 10 years, and now we're seeing this action for waterways come out recently, and it's, would say they're probably 10 years behind. They've brought into Mano Te Wai, which is great. We'd love to see consistency, but what this does make us think is the vision and strategy has to be the primary direction setting document. It has to lead the way. So if the rest of the country has moved up to this almost relative position of Te Ture Whai Mana, what's the next step for us in terms of setting another foundation, another platform of best management practices of achieving targets? And this was just a demonstration that we've been working in this space for a long time, along with River iwi and councils. So the discussion when we go for a review of the vision and strategy is what's the next platform for us? These are just some of the pieces of legislation. We actually had about 35 that we wanted to impact on, but as negotiations do, you end up coming down, and we're down to 20. I must admit the big focus has been on the Resource Management Act, because that's the piece of legislation that dictates the rules and how our waterways and soils are managed, and some work with the Conservation Act and fisheries, but we probably need to extend our reach a lot more into these other pieces of legislation. And so we've been talking with these agencies around whether they understand the VNS and what we can do at a local level to improve fisheries, to improve wāhi tapu access protection. and a whole range of other things. Just want to note the review. So just keep in mind, vision and strategy is a primary direction setting document. It is the most powerful piece of natural resource legislation in New Zealand. Every 5 to 10 years, we get to review this. And so we're currently in the review phase now. And at our next board meeting, we'll be talking about the potential for amendments. We've had to consider that Healthy Rivers is going on. The government's rolling out a whole heap of freshwater legislation. I'm concerned that they are going to be, I'm not concerned, I'm just concerned that I don't understand what the scrapping of the ARIA may mean to the vision and strategy next government term. But currently we're in this review phase now. After the review, during the review, we'll come and talk to everyone. We come and talk to the councils, anyone that was deemed considered appropriate to talk with. We've had feedback from River Iwi over the last 2 years about what amendments may, and what we have identified mainly is that there are gaps. There's nothing in about water flow. There's nothing there about climate change because we didn't understand that 10 years ago. There's some provisions that we've seen enacted that we disagree with. And so we want to capture that and see how that might be reflected in the review or under an amendment. Once the board agree with the support of River Iwi that maybe some amendments are required, then we go through a notification of the draft, submission process, hearing of submissions and the decision. There's no appeals. The legislation is quite strict and as says there'll be no appeals. We'll get some feedback and then we will develop a draft vision and strategy to present to Waikato Tainui and the Crown. The decision to make an amendment or accept amendments is not for the Waikato River Authority, it's for Waikato Tainui and the Crown to approve or decline. So it's very important that we work quite closely with the Crown and Waikato Tainui so that we're not presenting them something that's crazy. Again, it just reminds us of the commitment that Waikato Tainui have had to the river and taking responsibility for its health and well-being. So we'll be in touch a bit more about the review, Gavin, because it's obviously going to have quite a big impact. I won't talk too much about this, but we'll be guided by the Free River Acts, and there's some range of things we have to consider. Each of the River Iwi now have environmental plans. And we've also had the scoping study, well, the Waikato River Independent Scoping Study done in 2010. So we need to consider those, and we also consider targets and methods. I'm not too sure what that would look like. If we do go down that path, it will require a lot of science and mātauranga Māori to provide context on why those amendments should be made. I'm going to skip that. So that's the vision and strategy. Just wanted to quickly demonstrate its impact regionally on activities, on council policy and plans, and also the other pieces of legislation that operate within the space. So that's a vision and strategy. The second part is our funding. And the way I explain it is that when Waikato Tainui were very clever, and then they said, hey, to achieve the aspirations for our other, we need policy and we need projects. We need some good stories, we need some good things, we need to enable employment because health and well-being of the people, restoring that relationship. And negotiating a fund allowed our whānau to apply for funding and move back to the awa. And it's been really great. We hear some great stories from Punya River Kia, Ngati Hawa Mahi Trust, Waterside Planters, where whānau are now leaving their jobs at Fonterra and coming back to work for the awa because there's actually employment opportunities now. And the tribe negotiated 210 million over 30 years. And when Maniapoto came in 2012, they added another $10 million. The funding will be received $7 million a year until 2037. Beyond that, we have to fund ourselves unless we come up with another negotiation package, which would have to be led by the iwi. And so to make sure we've got funding, we've been investing some of that money. So of the 7 million, we aim to distribute 6 million a year, invest $1 million. And so far we're looking on track to continue funding between $6 to $8 million beyond 2037. which is really cool. Annually, we also receive about $900,000 to run the Waikato River Authority administratively, all under vote environment. So this is just a picture down at Orake Korako. I don't show this to Ngāti Tuwharetua because this is Ngāti Tahuwhaua putting up a po that's in one of those grey areas. But yeah, really cool when you see whānau expressing the value and history of their places. Over the last, since 2011, the River Authority has distributed, actually when I say the River Authority, I do mean the tribe as well, because it's the tribe's fund that they thankfully were given guidance on not to take themselves, but to distribute for anyone that can better restore and demonstrate projects to restore the awa. So any of the River Authority's numbers, stats, are actually the tribe's statistics as well. So 50 million has been distributed, and that has contributed to about 80 to $90 million worth of projects. Collaboration has improved, reaching a lot more people. These numbers are great, 1.8 million trees, hundreds of kilometers of fencing, restored areas, but the main, I suppose the main benefit is that people are talking about the river, people are going back to the river, people are training to do river work. They now, because doing environmental stuff isn't sexy. People think you're working in the Garden of Eden, but actually you're working amongst scrub in a whole lot of rough areas. So it's really neat to see how people in community groups apply for funding. And so in general, this is our funding overview. 318 projects, 127 are currently active. Generally fund 30 to 45 projects a year. The largest grant is 1.7, and I think that was in the Waipa catchment. And in this year, we've just received $13.8 million worth of applications, with about 60 projects or 59 projects have come in. And so they've got a tough job because the quality of applications has improved a lot since 2011 when they were coming in on napkins applications. They're now coming in with real great scientific and mātauranga Māori support, or at least providing for that. So it's really neat to see, because the funding towards the river is not a distribution or a grant, it's an investment. So they have to be great and demonstrate that they're achievable. And what we make sure we do now in acknowledging that the river, that the funding came through a treaty settlement process, marae, hapu and iwi are not required to fulfill the co-management, the co-funding arrangement that others are, where we ask for, if you ask us for $1, you should be providing $1 in either cash or sweat equity or volunteer time. But the smaller groups like our marae don't have $10,000 in the account. So in acknowledgement of that, they are not required to achieve that contribution. Just an example, for like the first 5 years, it was almost like a scattergun approach, funding going into places that we weren't too sure if that was effective. So 3 years ago, this was launched last year, April, by the minister, was a restoration strategy. And the restoration strategy was said, like, where are the priorities for the communities in iwi? What vision does Restore and Protect look like for that lake, for example? Where are we now, and what are the actions to get there? So the restoration strategy in your catchment area identified about 30 projects. And this isn't for the Waikato River Authority to lead. This is a guide for anyone that's doing restoration works within the Waikato River catchment. So I just wanted to show that we're thinking more about where funding should go to be more effective, because the Waikato River Independent Scoping Study said it's going to take about $4 billion to maintain and hopefully improve the Waikato River catchment. The tribe negotiated $210 million, which is 5% of what's needed. So it's really important that then we try and get another 5% by asking for $1 for every dollar applied. So that doesn't happen. So now we need to use this fund to build up to, what do you call it? Make our dollar turn into $5. And so because we've got limited funds and we needed potentially 4 billion, we said, well, let's start putting money where we know the outcomes will be effective in terms of water quality, fish priorities, biodiversity, nutrient priority catchments, sediment erosion, etc. So yeah, there's more information about this. And they identified these types of outputs. Again, these are just outputs. It's the employment, the social benefits that we are starting to record now. And that's it really. Just wanted to say, offer the opportunity to come and talk to the team, Gavin, more about policy, and get some responses on what could be helpful, as I'm sure your team sees a lot of issues where a policy or a bit of impact from the vision and strategy might help them and help the iwi's aspirations as well. If you want some more information, there's our River Authority website, all the funded projects we've done, advocacy and leadership pages, and we're about to get ready to launch a map showing where all our projects are and historical data and what things look like now. So yeah, that was quite rushed, although it may not feel like it for you, but just really wanted to signal that we came from the River Authority establishes a mechanism under Waikato Tainui settlement for the river, reinforced by the Upper River iwi, co-management arrangements and Maniapoto settlement, and that we have 3 objectives: be kaitiaki and promote, advocate, push Te Ture Whaimana, improve collaboration and coordination and distribute funds, or to achieve restoration and protection of the Waikato River. Ka pai, I'll turn my screen off now.
You're right.
Any questions?
I've got a couple, Julian, if I may. So first of all, and look, again, great presentation. It really helps to cement what we heard from Taipu before. So that's really useful. I'm interested, and I know I've said this to you and Bob, I can see that the review of the vision and strategy, the review, I think could be quite challenging, because for a number of reasons, everyone is more informed now than they were 10 years ago, and that can be a plus and it can be a negative as well, because people now, I think, are starting to see the benefits, or, well, some people are seeing the benefits, some people are seeing the restrictions that, you know, that the vision and strategy is you know, potentially imposing on what they are trying to do. So I think that's going to be a really challenging piece of work for you, and I wish you luck in that. But my question really is, I'm interested when I see the work that's going on and the projects that are being done. Did the River Authority make any application to the government through their shovel-ready project stuff around maybe getting more funding available to enable you to get more people employed doing more work?
Yes, we were part of an application through the Waikato Regional Council to pick up a lot of work. So I think the majority of that though was around the Waipa.
Right.
That's the only one I'm aware of. Yeah, Kevin.
Okay, thank you.
What else? I suppose one of the big ones that's we weren't aware of, and we had this little chat in your office the other day, was around the growth in subdivisions, housing. The explosion, I suppose, 10 years ago, I don't think we anticipated that. And it's quite scary to some of the communities, especially when you drop down from the Bombays and you see how Pōkeno is developed quite largely. I think it's going to be one of our considerations. I don't know what that might mean, and we take guidance from the tribe on that and also from local government. But yeah, I think that's one of those areas we're going to have to explore. And again, no one wants to slow development, but we definitely need to make people think a bit more positively about managing water in their spaces. So yeah, I'll look for some guidance on that, Gav, from you.
Looks like we might have lost Ruku again.
Yeah. I suppose if I could just keep talking, one thing I am noticing, Gavin, and there's a small subdivision happening in Arawahia, proposal in Hakirimata Road. No, it's on Old Taupiri Road. And I'm starting to see assessments now, cultural assessments in particular, where they assess it against Waikato Tainui Environmental Plan and also each of the 13 objectives of the vision and strategy. And I think we've got to get to a point where we are training our whānau, because the council, all councils would ask that a cultural values assessment or some kind of engagement report is developed, and how we support our marae to deliver those reports and the type of assessments they should be doing. And what I'm starting to see now is assessments against the vision and strategy, which is really neat, and also assessments against the environmental plan. So people are picking these up, and hopefully that helps better inform the council on some of their work, although I think probably the River Authority needs to provide a bit more support to marae, iwi and hapu that are undertaking those types of works.
So I don't want to oversimplify this, but some kind of template would be quite helpful, I would have thought, in terms of at least making sure that we cover all these things.
Yes, so I'll probably lead to them. I'm actually working with Waikato Tainui on a template. I've also worked with Waikato Regional Council last year on some guidance for resource consent applicants, but it was like 60 pages, so we've got to bring that back somehow, and we've got to then take that to the iwi to see what restore and protect means for them. And all it is guidance. It shouldn't replicate what, it shouldn't stand over top of direct engagement with marae.
Look, it looks like we've lost Ruku, so I'll just step in there again, Lynette. Oh, it looks like we've got Ruku back just in time. Ruku, is that you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yay. Okay. Thank you, Julian. I'm sure everyone has had a chance to make comment, but again, recognise the challenges you have as the River Authority with the review and the timing of the review. What is the scope of the review? You've made some good comments around kind of how we can contribute to that at a council, water governance board level. Your commentary around restore and protect, I think getting clarity from us as an organisation, as council in particular, what that means for us and how we weave that together with other interests, both iwi and the community, is going to be key to kind of building. I think we should recognise the progress. You talked to the restoration strategy. It's great to see that there has been work done to be much more strategic in how the funding is allocated to restore the awa. So that's good. So I think, so looking forward to more engagement and how we can together improve the state of our awa in a way that achieves the vision and strategy. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Ruku, we haven't gone round everyone, so.
Oh, you haven't? Okay, sorry. Right, open it up. David.
Yeah, well, it's just an observation. Firstly, Julian, thank you very, very much. It strikes me there's great leverage to be had with some of the freshwater reforms that are happening. If you just look at the legislation that come through in the last fortnight, now the obligations it's putting on the farming community around grazing, stock holdings, wetland management, feedlots, stock exclusion from waterways and so on, that there's a wonderful overlap with the work that your group are doing along what I presume to be more along the rivers themselves. So I presume that you are well wired into those freshwater reforms and where there might be opportunities to work in collaboration and be complementary with this, the obligations that the landowners are now going to have around nutrient and water quality, and therefore the impact it will have on the river itself.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And last week we've sat down and we've got this table full of we've looked at each objective and policy and whether or not we believe it aligns with the vision and strategy. But most of our work, because we've already got Te Ture Whai Mana here, and there's nationally they're pushing Te Mana o Te Wai, but we've got Te Ture Whai Mana. A lot of I think the biggest works for us is going to be working with the River Iwi alongside to provide guidance to Waikato Regional Council, especially when we come to determining these freshwater management units and the targets that we're going to have to be set there. That could be some great work to set us all up for the future and hopefully give everyone some confidence on where they're heading to when it comes to the activities.
I'm watching the project you'd funded there with the planting going on. It strikes me there's some employment opportunities there because the work that you're doing along those river edges are going to have to be mirrored with the work that's happening on farming properties in terms of fencing waterways, riparian planting and so on. So I don't know whether you thought about it, but I would have thought there's some employment opportunities as well for Waikato Tainui to offer labour and services to landowners as they address their issues.
Yeah, well, we're already seeing that the groups are doing such a good job that the neighbours are looking over the fence and asking them to carry on. Probably one of the changes we always try to push for more, and that shouldn't be a surprise. But so initially, there was 1 metre setbacks and now it's 5. So now we were funding only if you did 5 because it was initially 1. And now we're going to have to look like, well, if we want the vision and strategy to always be the primary direction and setting document, what's beyond 5 and what do we support averaging, whole range of things. There is a lot to be considered. Thanks, David. And yeah, I've got a big table to work through right this time.
Thanks, Ruki.
Thanks, David. Garth, any comments from you?
Fantastic presentation, and thank you, Julian. One thing I wondered was, are you guys tied in with Water NZ and like the Water NZ forums and the large sort of gathering they have of all the kind of associated water treatment and water management bodies that come together?
I say we're not. We generally get invited to Planning Institute stuff and other spaces if they're looking for an area that's, well, if they're looking to adopt some things that are already happening here, like the co-governance, co-management arrangement in our funding. But when it comes to the water infrastructure, I don't think, no, we haven't attended those discussions.
I just sort of wondered, I mean, just because part of the restoration process is obviously the treatment of those 3 waters. And, yeah. Julian, a lady by the name of Gillian Blythe has just taken over the CEO-ship of Water NZ. She might be worth reaching out to. She's got a lot of interesting sort of regulatory background experience, but also
it sounds familiar.
So happy to do an introduction if you need one.
Oh yes, please. No, that'll be really great. Thanks.
I'll try and get her to give you a call or something. But again, they're doing some really interesting stuff and concerned with, like I say, 3 waters, but also doing quite a bit of work just in terms of land use and the implications of land use and water quality.
Yeah.
Right.
That'll be.
Thank you.
In there too. Awesome. Thanks, Garth. Jackie? Oh, yeah, this is probably yours. Second hand to you, given your recent appointment onto the River Authority, but I'll give you the opportunity to make any comments.
I just want to say thank you to Jules for the presentation. Lot of material to absorb, I guess, for our board colleagues who might not be familiar with the WRA and the Cleanup Trust, but I think it gave a great overview. In terms of some of the engagements that are being planned, it makes sense to me that we might try and capitalise off some of the different sessions. So I note that this session's recorded, so maybe getting Taipu and Jules' presentations cut from this particular recording so that it's available for staff across the region. And I'm really interested in, I guess, the work, Jules, that you mentioned you're doing for the WRC. what that looks like and how we can be applying, I guess, consistent guidelines, obviously not 60 pages worth, but across the catchment. You know, Jules, about the work that's happening within the corridor. So the Three Waters work, the blue-green corridor work, and the relationship that's having with some of the spatial land use planning activities. So be really keen to, I guess, get yourself more involved as your time allows in some of that work, which is within the catchment. Thank you.
Kia ora, Jackie. Thank you.
Great. Well, Julian, we'll appreciate your time. I know you've got other hui this afternoon, so I am sure we will engage again in the near future. Appreciate what you're doing, the role of the WRA. Please keep monitoring what's happening at that national level, and Jackie referred to the consistencies, but you know, Te Ture Whai Mana o Te Wai at a national level. How is the national reform going to impact on what we already have established as a region? So I think that's going to be a key role for the River Authority, particularly as those RMA reforms or the scrapping of the RMA is being considered. So, but appreciate the work that you're doing, and no doubt Gavin will be in contact around the presentation to all of staff in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Rukumona. Thank you. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, thank you.
Nō hora.
Thank you, Gavin, for organising those two presentations. Probably went a bit longer than we had anticipated, but important nonetheless. And I think as we look to roll out further training, there might be areas that would want to do a deeper dive, but I hope the board found that useful today. We are now at the end of our open agenda, and so if I'm mindful you haven't had a comfort stop, so before we actually, if I can take us to where am I? We're now into the public excluded section on page 90. So could I, sorry, Gavin, you're putting your hand up.
Just, we need to, we just need to move into public excluded, yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to do. So,
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Did we resolve on the water reform stuff? I thought we didn't do a resolution. I'm not sure. It's really critical.
Yes, we did.
We did we? Okay, sorry, I must have missed that.
What we haven't done though is had a mover and a seconder to receive the presentations. So Gavin, David, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So, so the recommendations on page 90 to that public be excluded from the points outlined on page 90. Can I have someone move that way? Thanks, Gavin. Garth second. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Against? Carried. Apologies, actually. And also as part of that, have we still got Sharon with us?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So if we could also permit Sharon Danks to remain in the meeting due to her knowledge of the water care papers that we will be considering. Can I have someone move that way? Thanks, Garth. Second, David. All those in favour, raise your hands. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right. So
Roku, if you'd just like to adjourn the meeting just to so I can shut down live stream and get ready for the public excluded, and I'll let you know when we're good to go back in.
Okay, so we should come off, leave
So
this.
If we just adjourn now.
Okay, right.
And I'll let you know when it's time to go back in.
Right, thank you. Yes, David, you can go and get you a cup of tea or something.